to another episode of Still Unbelievable. If you're one of the lucky ones, and if I feel so inclined, maybe you can even see us as well as hear us. So here I am welcoming on an old friend, somebody who I've had on a couple of times. I've even guested on his podcast, and he remains to this day, after 5, nearly 6, what is it, even 7 years of podcasting, the only person that I've sat face to face with and had a conversation about podcasting and about Christianity, about being an ex-Christian and all that jazz. Maybe we'll even get a chance to do it again. But guys, welcome to the one, the only, the fantastic, my great friend, Clint Heacock. Welcome, Clint. It's been way too long since I've had you on, but welcome back again.
It is. Thank you, Matthew. I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation. And as you said before we hit record, we might be meeting up again sometime in December.
That would be cool if we can work it out. Still sketchy, yes. But let's try and work that out, yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be brilliant. Now, the last time we spoke, we were also saying was when you brought David Hayward, the naked pastor, onto my episode of Still Unbelievable, and we were doing a year on review, and it was a year that included that nasty word COVID. So that must have been 2 years ago now, Clint, which is way, way, way too long for us to go without talking like this.
Really
so
is.
Lots has happened. You've had major changes in your podcast stream. So tell us all about that.
That's true. The first thing, as you mentioned, one of the big changes was I changed the name of my show. It used to be called the Mind Shift Podcast for about, 4 or 5 years. But I realized there were way too many shows called the Mind Shift Podcast, everything from education podcasts. There were actually pastors of churches who had the name of that show. And I realized I've got to do something to sort of separate myself from the Mind Shift Podcast crowd. So I changed the name of the show. I think it was April or May, something like that, of 2024 to the Dismantling Doctrine Podcast. It's a far better name. It actually does exactly what it says on the tin. You can look at the title and go, yeah, I think I know what the show is about. So yeah, I changed the name of the podcast.
And I think that was a good change. Your justification for doing so makes complete sense. And to my own embarrassment, so laugh at me as much as like when I first came across you, I think it was on Twitter, I first found that website that we don't talk about anymore. And I found you on there and followed you for a bit, and then went and found a podcast called Mind Shift and listened to a bit. And it was a couple of episodes before I realized that, hang on a minute, this isn't the podcast that belongs to that YouTube person that I follow. What have I done wrong? So I had to go back on and find it again. And I thought, how could I be so dim? And it was an educational podcast, and it genuinely, it took me a couple of listens to work it out. I can't believe why, because your social media feed at that point, certainly on let's call it Twitter, was very much of the strain that I talk about, very much a religion critique, and this podcast that I was listening to wasn't of that same vein at all.
Where's the hard-hitting expose of Christianity and cults?
I know. So this guy is nothing at all like his social media personality. What's going on?
Yeah, this is crap, man. This is unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. This guy's too nice. He can't be a friend of mine.
Yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah, so yes, Dismantling Doctrine is a much nicer title. And I remember you came up with quite a few ideas and you put them out on your Facebook, I think, and you talked around a few ideas and took a bit of feedback, and then a little bit about graphics as well. And it was good that you included your audience in that, and fans of the show, and they all had. And I think the way that worked, what the positive aspect of that is, when everybody agreed on it and people said that, it means that as a listener, I feel actually have some ownership in that title, and it makes me more invested in your show. So well done. But I have no plans to change Still Unbelievable because I can't think of a better name. So I will not be pulling that trick, but I wish I'd thought of it.
Yours may have been the deciding vote, Matthew. I don't know. I can't remember. You're right. It was good to get the listeners involved in that, because I felt like, there's got to be some investment here, so that rather than just changing the name of the show arbitrarily, I wanted to get people's input and advice. The main thing is there is no other show right now that I know of that is called the Dismantling Doctrine Podcast. It is the only one. So at least I've got that going for me, which is good.
Yeah, you need a book now to go with it.
And what a segue. Shameless plug.
It's as though I've been doing this for a few years, really, isn't it?
Yes, so that was the other big change. In September of this year, 2024, I came out with a book My really good friend Tim Sledge helped me edit it, and I think he did help me produce a better book. But it's called "Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People: How Bill Gothard Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work." And it's been doing really well on Amazon. It's exclusively available only on Amazon, so we self-published it.
Well done. And what gave you the idea to write the book? Because you did preview that very slightly one time when we spoke, that this book was coming up, and now it's out. So why did you feel that you needed to write the book?
It's a funny thing because the book was already written in a lot of ways. I wrote the whole kind of idea for it probably 7 or 8 years ago, and it was supposed to be just a chapter in a book, a collaborative book of ex-evangelicals, and I just kind of went on a tear. Instead of a chapter, I wrote about 50 pages. I thought, okay, well, this is a lot longer than a chapter, so there's something that needs to come out. But I forgot about it for a long time. It was just kind of on the back burner, sitting in a file somewhere. And then I had a job a couple of years ago, weirdly enough, working at a prison. I was teaching carpentry and joinery at a prison here in North Wales. And during my lunch breaks, we had these long breaks after lunch. And I would just go in on the computer and I'd pull up these documents and I just started continuing to write. And it was a very cathartic process because the book is about my upbringing. And really, I call it a cultic, sort of a fundamentalist Christian environment. And then how I got out of that. So I would just spend probably 45 minutes a day for a good 6 months and just write and write and write. So that's how the book came about.
Excellent. And you mentioned cathartic there. So why, if cathartic to me means that there was definitely a lot of emotion involved in writing.
Yeah.
There was some pain involved in writing. There was process of past memories, some of which would potentially be extremely painful. Some would have been really difficult for you to recall well enough to be able to write comfortably. Why would you put yourself through something like that?
Well, it's a beneficial process, I think. It really is. If it's cathartic, it's getting this stuff out for a reason. It's helpful to your own psychological benefit, I think, your own well-being. Because when I wrote the book, it was a cathartic process, but I didn't know what was going to happen with it. And then Tim, when I sent him the sort of raw document, the manuscript, he said, okay, there's really something here. I think a lot of people are going to resonate with your story. Because one thing that comes across the feedback that I've gotten, there's a documentary on Amazon called Shiny Happy People. Now, I don't know if people have seen that.
I've certainly heard of it. I've not watched it. I think here in the UK, people are at least aware of it, or some people in the evangelical community are aware of it, even if they haven't seen it. Feedback that I've heard from people who've seen it is it's quite a watch, and maybe people with the kind of background that we've got, that's heavily as a young person in evangelical Christianity, that there might be some uncomfortable moments watching it.
Absolutely. And that's why we titled the book Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People. Obviously, it was a play on the title of that documentary because there's an overlap. The documentary it's a long story, but it's about there was a really popular show in America called 19 Kids and Counting. There was a particular family called the Duggars, and this show, followed there, and they had this huge family, and they were all wonderful Christians, loving, and everything seemed so wonderful and amazing. But there's a real dark backstory. They followed the teachings of a guy named Bill Gothard, who had a ministry called the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP. And it comes out of this whole, what they call quiverful, having a huge family. You're going to take dominion by just purely outbreeding other people, just have lots and lots of kids, homeschooling in this really kind of a controlling religious environment. And there's a lot of stuff that came out about the Duggars later that was really quite disturbing. And that's what the Amazon documentary talks about. Well, I was raised in a kind of a similar environment. My parents followed Bill Gothard's teachings as well. They patterned their marriage and their family on his sort of quote unquote biblical principles. And that was the environment I was raised in. So it was very cult-like, I would say.
It's funny you mentioned that word, because that was exactly what was going through my mind as you were talking about that. I was thinking, yikes, this sounds like a cult.
Mm-hmm. But of course, I would have never, ever said that when I was a kid. And that's what comes across in the book. I talk about, I was in what I call the Christian bubble. I went to church every Sunday, every Wednesday. I was in Christian school. I went to Christian summer camp. I didn't even know any non-Christians. The only non-Christians I knew were my two cousins who lived next door. And of course, I was busy trying to save them, evangelize them all the time, So
wow.
The only people that were non-Christians were my projects, my salvation project, and I felt so bad that I didn't get them saved, and everything. I had every opportunity. I tried everything I could do to think, everything I could think of to get them saved, but that was the thing. Everything was normalized. And that's the key thing, is that I didn't know any different. And yet I came out of it with rapture anxiety, religious trauma syndrome, all these things that I didn't know at the time were traumatizing me. But now, of course, as an adult that has walked away from it all, I can see how damaging it all was.
Yeah, it really saddens me to think not only did it happen to us, but there are people out there it's happening to now. That as a child, there's people that people that you play with, people that you enjoy the company of, people that you love dearly, and in some cases, as you just said, people who are our own family members. And as a child, your greatest priority is to get them to believe the same things as you. And this whole concept of being a child, being in that moment, and literally just having fun in the dirt is secondary. And I think that's so sad. And I look back at my own childhood about moments that are not too dissimilar to that, and it fills me with sadness that was a mentality that I was indoctrinated into, and worse still, that adults thought it was a good thing to teach that to a child. And I hold heavy amounts of disdain and bitterness towards adults that teach that to children.
Absolutely. And that's what I talk about in the book. I say it is a form of abuse. Religious indoctrination of children is a form of abuse. Now, the key thing is my parents, my pastor, all the Christians around me, they weren't intentionally lying to me. They believed it with all their hearts. Yeah. And that's one of the things I've had to process through now as an adult, as an ex-evangelical, is that I was really angry, like you said, for a long time. I was pissed off that I'd been put through that. But one of the things I realized is that they believed it. They firmly believed it. They weren't intentionally thinking, oh, I'm going to lie to this child and tell him something that I know is not true. They believed it was 100% true, and they thought they were going to heaven and all the rest of it, and they wanted me to go too, So it was a case of everyone was caught up in the spell, so to speak. We all believed it. We all were in that bubble, and I've had to walk away from all that.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because one of my experiences as a very young child growing up in the missionary environment in Zambia is boarding school, where all the teachers were missionaries. Effectively, they were teachers, but they were white, so they weren't indigenous locals to Zambia. They were imported either from America or from the UK, and they came over to do their mission work as trained teachers to come and teach us white-skinned children of missionary is about life and teach our education. And I look back on that, and some of them, one particular teacher was brutal, physically brutal, and I hold no love for her at all, quite the opposite, in fact. But some of the other teachers, I had a good relationship with them. Learning under them was lovely. I always felt that I was safe in their hands. Obviously, I'm ignoring the Christian indoctrination at this point, but as a young impressionable child, those were the people who, any given year, I spent more time with these teachers than I did with my own parents, because it was a boarding school. Now, I was only with my parents for a few months of the year. I was at boarding school for most of the year with these parents. So for many of us in this situation, these teachers were the people who also saw us in the evenings. So they picked us up when we were down. As in when we fell down, if we had a cut on our knee, they bandaged that up. If we were upset, they were the ones there that cuddled us. They were the ones that made sure all our clothes were clean, our clean clothes were out, all our hygiene was looked after, etc. They parented us as well as taught us. And so for a great number of those teachers, I actually feel a love for them because of the way I was looked after. But there is still this horrible, toxic religion that harmed so many of us. And I have a difficulty there. So it'd be interesting to see what your perspective on this is. How do I look back on those people with love when my overriding feeling of coming out of that that formative environment is actually one of disgust? How do we balance that as people? Because if I was to meet one of those teachers now, I genuinely am unsure how I would feel and how I would react.
I was thinking about that too the other day, because when I was in Bible college and seminary. I mean, I wasn't at a boarding school, but I had several professors who were kind of in a similar mentoring role, hugely impactful in my life on a personal level, that did a lot of really great things for me personally. And yet, as you say, you got to separate out, wait a minute, they were still teaching me Bible, theology, all this stuff. And yet they were great people on a lot of levels,
Mm.
loving, wonderful people. So I think that's part of the process of coming out of any religion or cult, is you've got to separate out those things. And it's very difficult to do. It might require therapy, actually, for some people, I think, to get through those things, where you have to separate out, okay, the actual person, what he or she did for me as a
Mm.
person on a loving level and all those things, versus what they were teaching me. Because that's the thing, they firmly believed that it was true. They weren't
Yeah.
coming and lying to you, as I was saying before. They weren't going, I'm intentionally going to lie to Matthew to mislead him.
No,
They thought they were doing the right thing for
they
all the
did.
right
Yes.
reasons.
Yes. And harm can come through good intentions.
Sure, absolutely.
And that, I think, for people, those of us who leave, was that a problem for you then? Did you have to battle that specific emotion when you were recovering from Christianity? Now, because let's not call it leaving Christianity, let's call it recovering from Christianity. I think that's a really good phrase to use. But that kind of dichotomy of people who you felt loved by and who were all in and thought they were doing good, but actively harmed you. Is there a process that you had to go through to recover through that?
Yes, I think that's part of the recovery process, as you say, and I think it's a paradigm shift in a way, because when I left Christianity at first, maybe 15 years ago, as you say, you go through stages,
Mm.
and this is something that's really important, I think, for people to understand. Anytime you leave a controlling religion or
Yeah.
cult or group or something like that, it's not a monolithic response. We all react differently, but there are sort of like the grief process. You go through
Yeah.
anger and denial and different things like that, and acceptance maybe comes at the end. And I went through all those phases, and I can see that now, years
Yeah.
later. I was very angry, and I was angry about the money I'd spent, the time I'd spent in Bible
Yeah.
college and seminary and as a pastor and all those things. I mean, I wasted most of my adult life from a career perspective, just purely from, I could have been doing any number of things
Mm.
if I hadn't had that upbringing and that background. But it's a difficult one. I think you have to process through those things. Now, though, I went through a phase where I kind of thought, well, Christianity is pretty benign. I've left it, but they can do their own thing. But now I'm more with what you're saying. I think it is very damaging and a harmful religion, and that's another phase that I've come to. And I'm more like you. I want to warn people about the potential
Yeah.
dangers of this religion.
It's very interesting you should say that. I went through exactly all those phases. I carried anger and bitterness, visceral anger and bitterness, for a very long time. And that was difficult for me. I wasn't expecting that as an emotional reaction. And I had to keep that under control for a lot of time, because I was in a scenario where I was surrounded by Christians and I simply wasn't safe to be able to let that out. It wasn't safe for me. It wasn't safe for them. It would have been very damaging to all people. But keeping that compressed in probably elongated the amount of time that I was angry and bitter for. I'll be honest
Yeah,
about that.
that's not
Um,
healthy either.
no, and it probably wasn't. I've got through it. And there was also heaps of shame. How could I have believed all of that?
Mhm.
And I think the one piece of advice that I give lots of advice, I would, whether it's asked for or not. But probably the first piece of advice I'll give to anybody on this is be gentle with yourself. You must be gentle with yourself. Don't give yourself an undue hard time over the embarrassingness of the past. Be nice to yourself. You deserve it. You are
It's
worthy
true.
of it.
And something I had a recent guest on, she's absolutely fantastic. Her name's Karen Unruh. She lives actually down near Oxford. She's a Brit, but she lived in America for a long time. She was married to an American serviceman. And something she said recently on a call that we had, she said, people are, like you just said, people, we can be so hard on ourselves. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have been so gullible? I'm an idiot. She said, no, hang on a minute. If you're traumatized and things like that from your past, it's normal to react the way we do. You are
Yeah.
normal.
Yes.
That anyone would react that way to trauma. That's how
Yes.
people react when they're traumatized. That's
Yes.
normal. So the
Yes.
person that you become with religious trauma syndrome or PTSD, whatever you want to call it, that is actually normal. Don't be
Yes.
so hard on yourself. That's the way anyone would react, and you reacted typically to most of the population. So yeah, I think that's a really good balanced perspective.
Yeah. Right. I'd like to move back to books because there's some very specific questions I want to ask you about your writing process. But before we do that, I want to do a plug. Oh, and by the way, listeners or viewers, because I'll try and put this onto YouTube as a video if I can, there will be links to Clint's book, Clint's podcast in the show notes. Just pop down there, find them, click them, go, or just type Clint's name into Google. You'll find all the juicy bits, probably bits that I can't tell you, but you'll find it all there. But I too have also been involved in a book project. I got involved in a book project 6 years ago, which preceded the launch of Still Unbelievable. Still Unbelievable, the book, is available on Amazon. Small price of 99p or 99 cents. Any money that we make of it gets immediately donated to charity. Please, if you want to just buy it and let it sit there, you've at least donated a small amount of money to charity. So please do that. I have talked multiple times about doing an edition 2 about that. It needs a re-edit and possibly a couple of new chapters. That will eventually happen. Don't hold your breath for the 10-year, but maybe that's what I've got to realistically aim for. But I've also been involved in a book project which comes out in January. If you've been a regular listener to this podcast, you already will know about that. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, there's a back catalogue that you need to listen to. So Apostate is a book that's coming out on January the 6th. If this is before January the 6th, there'll be a link in the show notes to pre-order. Hopefully that same link will take you to the available book to order. So I've contributed a chapter to that book. It's called Apostate because it tells the story of, I think it's 21 authors who have all told a chapter of their life about their journey out of Christianity, to some extent their recovery from Christianity. It's been put together by a lovely lady, Sarah Bacala. She's also featured on an episode of Unbelievable. If you don't know who she is, the episode is literally 1 or 2 episodes back. So back catalogue again. So that book's coming out. And as I say, Clint, I've written a chapter for that. So I've told my story in various ways. And I promise you, if you've heard me tell my story on this podcast a couple of times, on David the Graceful Atheist podcast a couple of times, hints of it on Clint's podcast at least once, and other places. There's also the Missionary Kid podcast, whose name I can't remember. I'm sorry, chaps. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of your podcast. There's just way too many podcasts. Anyway, there is stuff in that chapter that you have not heard, is what I'm trying to get to, in other places. So go and get the book, not just for me, but for the other wonderful people who have all contributed a chapter to the book Apostate. So Clint, what I wanted to ask you about the writing process is one of the things that was a new experience for me, because I've blogged about my life story. Even before I came on to Still Unbelievable, I was blogging. And so the blog goes back 12 years or more. And so I've told huge chunks of my story on that. But this was my very first experience of writing down a part of my story. Sorry, excuse me. Oh, us British people, we can't cope with viruses. I've got a runny nose. I am sorry you had to see that, viewers. If you're watching in audio, consider yourself lucky. But this is the first time ever I've written down a part of my story, and then someone else has edited it, and then it's come back to me, and I've had to read it. What was that experience like for you?
That was difficult. Yeah, Tim said early on in the process, it probably took about a year to edit the book. And he said, there's going to be times when you're going to hate me. You really are going to hate me. You know, and there were times, I will confess, I was upset when I'd see an email coming from Tim going, oh, come on, are you kidding me? Another edit, another change. But the thing about it is for in the editing process, yes, you're exactly right. You're launching your story out there, and then someone else reads it and feeds back to you what they think. Yeah. And Tim's whole thing was, let's make this better. Let's make it more engaging. Let's make it more readable. We want a page turner. We want something that people aren't going to just turn aside after a few pages and go, I'm not interested. You know, so that process was really good. It was really valuable for me because I come out of academics, so I tend to write more of like an academic style at a higher level. And something Tim said was that the average New York Times bestseller is something like a year 8th grade level reading. And so I had to tone it way, way, way down. And that's not what I wanted to, how I would agonize over word choices, things like that. And there were things I wanted to say that I went to the plate and I said, no, we're leaving that in, Tim. It's got to be in there. So it's like you say, it is a difficult process, but in the end, the editor did make it a better product, I would say, as painful as it was at times.
Yeah, it was strange for me. Again, mine was only a chapter, not a whole book, though I am thinking maybe I'd like to write my story as well. Maybe that's an offline story we can talk about, Clint, but it's something that I'm playing with. Multiple people have told me that I should given some of the stories that I've told. But I imagine when it's a much bigger narrative, the edit process is more painful. For me, it was mostly weird than painful. And there was one specific bit that I read, and it used a word which I would never use. And I got the intent and I understood the meaning. It just, everything about it read wrong for me. And it was basically at final edit stage. And I don't remember where that word came from, whether it was a recent addition or whether I'd literally just not clocked on in previous edits about that word. But the final edit was, this is not for fine tuning. This is if there is something really seriously wrong. This is not a fine tuning edit. This is spelling mistake kind of territory. Yeah. This, and I read it and I agonized. I went, ugh, and I read it again. And I think I read the sentence about 4 or 5 times. And then I literally had to say to myself, it's okay, Matthew. It is okay. Nobody else who's reading this will have that reaction. Nobody else who's reading this will ever say, Matthew would not say that word. Nobody else who's reading this will pause like you have paused. They'll read it and they'll carry on. And so the key question you need to ask yourself, Matthew, is, does it ruin the message? Does it change this part of your story? No. Then what's your problem?
Exactly. Why are we getting so hung up on this thing? One word.
Yeah. But it's funny how I get it. It's deeply personal. We've poured out our heart and our soul onto pages, and we've done it sometimes through tears. I know I wrote my chapter through tears. There are times when my eyes were so blurred up, I literally couldn't see the keys on the keyboard, and I had to step away, go, Matthew, just take a moment and return. But you're in that moment, and you keep trying to type through the tears because it's there. You don't want to endure it for any longer, but it's there, so you need to get it out. And so I wrote that. So the ownership you have of those words is intense. Yeah. And then someone else goes and changes them.
Yeah, that's why Tim says you're going to hate me, because there were times. I mean, I'm a lover of vocabulary. I've always been I've always been a voracious reader, and I collect words. It's like I'll hear a good word in a book that I'm reading. I'm like, oh, I had a list of words. I'm like, I got to get that word in this book somehow because it's so expressive and so emotive and everything. And then Tim would say, it's too technical. We got to get rid of that word. I've agonized for hours, or I've searched the thesaurus online. I've done everything to just fine tune that word, that sentence, and you want to chuck it out. But one of the interesting things, I never thought about this, was that he was also looking at it from a marketing point of view, which I never realized. And he said, we're not just quote unquote dumbing it down to make it more for stupid people. It's not anything like that. It's if anyone stops and pauses and has to think, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's bad. We've interrupted their flow. From a marketing point of view, we have to make it a more readable book. And so I thought, some of these hills are not worth dying on when you look at it that way, that you don't want the reader to stop and pause and go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Because a lot of the things, too, was the timeline. Because I just wrote, like you said, emotively. I would write and write and write. And then Tim would say, no, wait, when did that happen? What year was that? What time? When? I don't know. I don't know. I'm telling you what happened. He said, no, because the reader is going to stop and go, no, wait a minute. I don't understand. Was he 12 then, or 10 or 7 or 15? the
chronology is challenging, isn't it?
Is so, and I actually, we made a spreadsheet. We made an Excel spreadsheet and I tried to remember dates and specific things when certain things happened because I reference them in the book, and we plugged a lot of that back in just to make it flow better. So the editing process is painful, but it really is a helpful thing. If you have a good editor, it is.
Excellent. And then the other question that I wanted to subject matter about all this that I want to talk to you about is the lady who's put the book together. She's involved in publishing, which obviously helps, and she does audiobooks. So she's going to read the entire book and the entire audiobook of all the stories. Sorry, excuse me. Oh, I'm now enjoying one of the products of my new employer. That's the other thing that we need to talk about, Clint, is since we last spoke, I've started a new job. You may have noticed from some of my enthusiastic Facebook posts. So I've now done 6 months at my new employer, and my new employer produces a carbonated product that is enjoyable in the home. And so my fridge is never without a bottle of that said carbonated product. And the cost of that is the cost of enjoying it while talking to you and having a cold has had an unfortunate mix. But anyway, there we go. You don't need that mental image, listeners. You absolutely don't. So anyway, so the lady who's put Apostate together, she's reading the whole book. And we did have a bit of a chat in the group about that, because a couple of people wanted to read their own stories, and I kind of wanted to read my own story, and I thought to myself, well, maybe another man reading my story works, because I've typed it. I'm a man. I've typed it as a man, so I'd like another man to read it if it's going to be, and the whole book's going to be read by the lovely Sarah. And it was okay, right? Well, I'm not going to be sexist about this. So, okay, change the gender. I'm not going to fret about that. But it's another voice reading my words. Okay, they've been edited, but they're my words. And the voice that's reading them is not going to be my voice. And I know the bits that need nuance. And I know the bits that need faster pace. And I know the bits that need some emotion and some punch into the words. Anybody reading it, whether male or female, is not going to know the nuances that I want to hear and I want to put into my words. So I'm looking forward to listening to my chapter in another voice and how somebody else is going to read it. I am, but I'm also a little bit nervous. But you, Clint, you went one better. You didn't even get a human to read your voice. That must have been really bizarre. And have you listened to the whole book in the voice?
I have. We did it through AI, actually, virtual voice on Amazon. We actually took advantage of it. It's in the beta process right now. I don't even know if it's officially launched, but this is something Tim found out, that when you publish the book as a Kindle version, as an ebook, within about 2 weeks, Amazon will just if you want this, you click the button, and it will produce an AI-read version of your book. And you can go and you can edit it to some extent, because obviously, like you said, a computer program won't know how to put the emphasis, and it'll pronounce certain words wrong and things like that. You can tweak it a little bit, but it's surprisingly good. I'm shocked. If you didn't know it was a human or wasn't a human, you would never. I don't think you'd guess that it wasn't a person reading the book. But I'm with you. I want to read my own book, and that's in the pipeline. It just takes a lot of time, because exactly right. I listened to it in the car when I was driving to work and things. I thought, this is good, but I want to read my own story for the exact same reasons you just expressed.
Yeah, I get that. So were there bits that hurt you, or was it just intrigue all the way through?
With the AI reading?
Yeah, listening to the AI reading.
A couple things, I thought, God, and Tim said there were certain things he just couldn't get the AI to do or to say right. So he had to actually change the wording a little bit, because it just wouldn't figure out how to say things, So I thought, okay, it wasn't terrible. I mean, it was really good, actually, surprisingly good. But
so you'd give it 9.5 out of 10?
I'd probably give it about 8 or 8.5 out of 10. Surprisingly, it is amazingly good. I was really skeptical, but he sent me a couple of samples early on in the process, and the main decision to do that was time, because I wanted it released along with the paperback and the Kindle version all the same day. And the only way to do that was to go for the AI option.
Right.
It was not possible for me to record the whole book in about 2 weeks. I mean, I just couldn't do it.
Of course not. No way that would happen, would it?
And that was the ultimate decision. And I'm glad we did that, because the Audible version, that's sold probably as many as the Kindle version.
Has it really?
You know? Yeah, because the option is, if you buy the Kindle version just for a little bit more, you can get the AI version. So it's not even that much more. It's like $1.99 on Amazon.com, but for like another 99 cents or 99p, you can get the Audible version. So it's almost nothing. So it's a good deal.
Okay. No, that's good. I think more and more people are consuming books audio. Absolutely. I think audiobooks are taking off more than actually reading a Kindle versus reading a real book did.
I think so, yeah. And that's why we wanted to do that, just to have that option. I mean, I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks, because where I work all over the place. Like as I was saying before we hit record, tomorrow morning, I've got an hour and a half drive to this job I'm doing, but I've got an Audible book on my iPad. Excellent. So that hour and a half drive, I'm looking forward to spending an hour and a half just on each way listening to this audiobook. It's time well spent, or listening to a podcast, something like that, so it's a good way to buy back some time, I think.
Yeah, that's what I do. I listen, when my iPod's not plugged in here to my computer being resynced, it's in my car. And the downside of my new job is my commute is half the distance it used to be. And so I have savaged my podcast listening time. And 6 months ago, when I started the new job, my listen list I was maintaining it around about 2.5 days of back catalogue that I needed to catch up on. It's now at 22 days. I have no idea how I'm going to catch that up. So I'm going to just have to right click, mark as lists, and I'm going to have to be savage with my playlist, I'm afraid.
You have to cut something.
I don't know who to cut. That's my problem. I genuinely don't know who to cut, and I'm in that predictable situation where, but I will listen to that, and then a week later it's 4 days back, and I'm like, I'm not going to listen to that.
New content already out.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. It's a rough decision.
But the idea of thinning down my playlist is too painful to do. But
it's brutal.
I've painted myself or drunk myself into a corner here, and I don't know how to get out of it. I really don't. I'm already listening at 2 times speed. In fact, I listen at 2 times speed so naturally that I hate it when I listen to it at normal speed. So if there's an iPod out there that does 3 times speed, maybe that's what the answer is.
There's got to be a solution.
Because I have to be.
Switch jobs again. Find a job that's further away. Maybe that's your solution.
Yeah, no, but you know what? I want to stay in this job. I'm too old. One of the problems, I'm past that particular age. So one of the big challenges when applying for this job was, do I really want to do it? My retirement is actually as a marker that I can see. Do I really want to be changing job at this time of life? When I was in a stable job, I was in a job that I liked, I was in a job I enjoyed, but some things had happened that made me unhappy. And then this opportunity came up. I work for a company now that's a household name. It's well respected in the area. It's got a great reputation in the area. And so I wasn't going to leave for anybody, but it was still a major risk for me. But it appears to have paid off. I love it. And this time I promise I am not moving on.
You say that.
I'm going to sit this one out. So I need to find a solution.
You know what's funny? Just thinking about going back to our topics of religion and everything, changing jobs and things like that, how much we would have invested the whole God thing in that whole conversation if we were evangelical still. You would have been saying, the Lord led me into another opportunity. You can hear the Christianese because I went through a similar job change this year. It was massively stressful. I quit a job, left the job, I'm working at the prison, and started another job. I kind of had to get another job. I didn't want to get another job. I wasn't looking to quit, but I had to, and I remember telling my girlfriend, through that whole process, it was hugely stressful. I would have been praying. I would have been seeking advice. I would have been reading the Bible. I'd have been talking to Christian, therapists, counselors, friends, pastors. What is God doing? God's doing something. He's up to something here. He's trying to teach me a lesson of faith. And the fact that I didn't obviously go there shows something, doesn't it? It reveals a lot about our own personal growth, I think.
It does. And yes, I have used exactly that, lines to the effect of God made it so that I got this job, or God fixed it so that I could move house, or something like that. I've had those conversations. I remember many years ago, I was only still in my 20s, so crumbs, decades ago. And a good friend of mine was looking to move house, and he found the house that he thought was going to be his perfect house. And I remember him saying to me with quite a pained expression, "Do you think it's okay if I pray to God that I get this house?" And he was clearly battling internally, trying to fight the whole, ask God for what he desires, but not wanting to be selfish about it. Is it frivolous to ask God for this? And he was really struggling. And my answer to him was, yeah, it's fine. If you want that house, ask God, but just make sure that you're humble in how you ask it. But yeah, and so that was kind of the answer that I gave, and you can probably imagine the kind of answer you would have given, Clint. But yeah, and the freedom to not have that worry is a blessing.
Those are the benefits we have to look at, I think. As we said, for when we leave religion, there's a lot of trauma and things we have to work through, but not having that. Because I can remember as an evangelical, everything had to have an answer. Everything had to have a reason. Why is this happening to me? What are you teaching me, God? What is the lesson here? What am I supposed to be learning right now? There's always something God's doing. He has a plan. He has what's God's will? The most inscrutable thing, to know what God's will is for your life. I mean, I remember when we moved to the UK, I was pursuing a doctorate over here in the University of Chester in England. And it probably took us 2 years to get everything together. And most of that was because we were praying and seeking the will of God to, should we do it? Should we move? Should we do this? Should we? Praying and talking to people. 2 years of wasted time when we could have just decided we were going to move. If we could make it work, let's just go. But it wasn't like that. Everything had to be in God's will.
Yeah, it's really kind of strange that, but the only way it's God's will is if it happens. And the only way it happens is if you actually go and do something about it happening.
Try to make it happen.
What's God actually doing in this?
Well, he's opening a door. That's what I used to I would teach people that kind of concept and say, you have to assume that God's answer is always yes. That's what I would tell people. So keep moving forward. And if he doesn't want you to do it, he'll stop you along the way, and that's probably the best thing I could do at the time. But if you take the God piece out of it, all it is you making things happen for yourself. And things, I see that now. I mean, the house I have, I bought it, I saved my money, but certain things happened that I got in touch with a guy who was a mortgage financer, and he put me onto some really good deals. He made it happen, but that was my girlfriend who gave me his number. Now, as an evangelical, I would have said that was a God thing. You see, I didn't have any chance to buy this house, but no, God provided this guy, Mike, and he was amazing. But no, it was just my girlfriend happened to know someone. It was networking, and he helped me out, and that's how it went. And I was able to buy a house. Nice. There was no God involved in it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's right. But the weird thing is, when you actually try to break it down, is in order for God to do that, he'll have had to have intercepted the thought processes of other people, Christian or not, to make sure that the decisions they make are the ones that benefit you. But at no point does he come to you and say, I want you to go and do that. But he magically makes them do things that benefit you. I mean, come on.
It's all about growing our faith. And that was the other aspect, wasn't it? Was that as we step out in faith, and this is the evangelical Christianese, you can hear the language so easily. It comes so easily to the tongue, that it's all about growing our faith, you see, because if he made it easy for everything, then there wouldn't be any growth involved. That's part of the really bad part about Christianity. The toxic bit is when suffering comes into our lives. And we would also have said, okay, what are you trying to teach us, God, when someone dies or something horrible happens to us, or to some loved one or something like that, a terrible tragedy? What's God trying to teach us? What's the lesson of faith here? It can't just be that so-and-so got cancer and got sick and died. Oh, no. God's trying to teach us something. So it's really a damaging, messed up sort of theology, I think.
Yeah. In part of my Christian life was certainly towards the latter time of my time in Christianity, was being part of a prayer team and praying for people for their prayer. And the number of people who expressed something along the lines of, I'm struggling here, I'm struggling with this, or I'm suffering with this, etc. I wonder if it's because I'm not good enough for God.
Mm-hmm.
And that must have been subconsciously, must have been part of what triggered my exit. Because I remember sitting there just feeling so pained that somebody would feel so low about themselves that they would feel this. And it wasn't until after I was out that I realized that Christianity made them think that way.
Yeah, it did that.
Christianity is so infused with this idea of we're wretched, we're not good enough, that it enters people's psyche and they think that way.
Absolutely.
And it's terrible to see. And as a prayer team member, I saw that more times than I care to admit. And it was awful, and it pained me every single time I saw it. And I don't just mean young people, I mean adults as well.
Absolutely.
Sensitive, mature, intelligent adults with this just crippling self-doubt about themselves that comes straight out of the essential foundation of Christianity.
It's true. I've told this story before on other shows, but I remember years and years and years ago when I was an evangelical, my then brother-in-law and I, we were supposed to speak at an all-night youth event in the Seattle, Washington area, and it was a hyper-charismatic church that we weren't part of. We just got invited because we knew the guy who was doing this thing. Anyway, long story short, we went to this event, and there was a group of kids, probably 15, 20 youth group kids, and they were all, when we got there, they were all praying for the gift of tongues. And some of them, I guess, had it. Half of them didn't have it. But what really struck me about it was, even at the time as an evangelical, I thought, these kids they're in agony. They're crying, sobbing, weeping. Oh, God, what's wrong with me that you haven't given me the gift of tongues, everybody else? And these kids were in just floods of tears and in agony. I thought, this can't be healthy. And it's that same dynamic. You can look at it in the charismatic sense, but as an evangelical, we had that same sort of thing where if something bad happens, what have I done? Do I have unconfessed sin in my life, or do I have enough faith? What is wrong with me? It always falls on me. I always say God gets off the hook. He never gets any blame for anything. There's always a reason. We're going to find out someday in heaven. Again, you can hear the platitudes.
Yeah. It fills me with sadness to know that is still going on in churches.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It really is. I'm conscious of time, Clint. You gave me a heads up before you came on that you had time. Are you good for time, or do you need to start?
Yeah, we can give a few more minutes. It's a great conversation.
It is. I always enjoy chat. I'd forgotten how fun it was chatting with you, Clint. And I also get follicle envy whenever we have a chat, because it's not just down here. It's up here as well. I simply haven't got it, and you're obviously way cooler than me, and
God loves me better.
There's not much more I can say about it than that, really.
You never know. This is actually out of control now. My girlfriend's got to trim it down, but yeah, it's kind of exploding out sideways.
She's not going to do a Samson on you, is she? She's going to wait until you pass out. You're going to wake up and you're going to look like this.
I'll be bald and have no beard. She likes it. She likes the ponytails. She likes the tattoos and everything else. So, but that's part of the reconstruction. Even that, because I had tattoos when I was a Christian, but they were always kind of hidden, underneath everything. But part of coming out is part of saying, hey, this is who I am. If I want to get a tattoo, if I want to get full sleeves and get tattoos on my hands, that's the person that I am. That's my authentic self. So that's who I am.
Okay, I'm bare. I don't even have tats.
You don't have ink, Ken?
So no.
You can do something about that.
Yeah, I am that holy, Clint. That I don't even. So how many have you got? Then let's go a bit light. Then how many have you got, and what's your favorite?
Oh, well, I've got complete full sleeves down both sides. I mean, it's hard to see, but on the hands and everything else. But I've got, funny enough, this one's one of my favorite ones. You can see it. That's my old. It's a kind of an adaptation of my old U.S. Navy squadron. Because when I was teaching at a college, I taught military veterans, And that's something I reconnected a lot with. Is I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, and teaching these men and women that were British, Army, Navy, Royal Air Force, and all that. It really kind of made me go, you know what? I have a lot of pride in. I served 8 years in the U.S. Navy. I didn't always look like this. I was clean cut, clean shaven, but I went out and got a tattoo on my hand that was indicative of the time that I served. But I have a lot of my whole left arm is a World War One tribute sleeve. I'm a huge fan of World War One history. Every year we go down to the battlefield, we go to the Somme and Passchendaele and all that. I should have been a history teacher. That's what I should have been. So I went out and it took a long time to get it done, but I've been to a lot of the places that are represented on my sleeve in France and Belgium and different places. So, it's just a passion for me.
Yeah, we should meet up next time you're doing something like that, because my World War One connection is, I can't remember if I've even told you this. My great grandfather was in India when World War One started, and so the battalion he was in the Highland Light Infantry, which is a Scottish battalion, and they set sail on ship from India. Took them about 3, maybe 4 months to get from India over to Europe, and they landed wherever it was in France or wherever, and marched on to where they were supposed to be up in northern Belgium. I think Ypres or in that sort of area was where they ended up, and it was this time of year actually. It was either late November, early December, and he'd basically a week after it was either a week after he'd landed or a week after they got to where they were supposed to be, he was blown up in an artillery explosion.
Yeah.
And that was that.
Yeah,
and it's such a colossal waste of a single individual. But he wasn't the only one who died that year. A colossal waste of many individuals from that battalion and all the others. I mean, it was a 4-year war, and that is just one story out of many utter wasteful tragedies of something that is just brought no greatness to the world at all.
Of what the world has lost in all the wars, what we could be, those people that and that's the thing I love about the World War One history. Finding people who were there, soldiers, war correspondents, things like that, and going to the places where they were. And I've got a lot of books on my iPad that are out of print now. Then I read that section from the book where they did what they did there, and it brings history to life. And it's kind of commemorating those people that served and wrote about the war and things like that. So I try to do my little thing. That's one of the things I'm planning on doing. Hopefully in 2025, I want to start a World War One podcast. That's a real dream of mine. I just need to spend the time to do it. So someday that will happen.
Yeah, somewhere, I don't know where it is anymore, and I hope it's not lost, but someone showed me that they'd actually found the complete itinerary of my grandfather's journey from India to Germany, or Belgium rather. And I know a little bit of his history, but it's really hard to dig up the history of somebody who was serving in India, pre 1914. It's really quite tough. So I need to do visits to the Commonwealth Graves Commission and other places to actually find that kind of information. But somebody did show me, and it was 2 pages, I think, the complete itinerary of the ship and the name of the ship and who they were traveling with and all that. It was fascinating. And when my mother died, that I tried looking for that information in her belongings, and it wasn't there. So I have no idea where it is or where it went, and I have no idea how to get it back again.
Is he listed on the Menin Gate Memorial, do you think? You could look it up on the Commonwealth War Graves.
I know he is listed on the Commonwealth Graves Commission, and I can find the plot number. I know he's on a plaque on a wall, because they never, as far as I'm aware, they didn't recover any body parts because of the nature of the explosion. But they just know that he was one of the ones missing, therefore dead. So I know there's a plaque on a wall, and so I've got on the Commonwealth Graves Commission there is a reference number for where I need to go to be able to find it, which I obviously would want to do next time I'm there. But beyond that, I don't have very much.
That might be the next trip we take, because I love going to Ypres and Passchendaele and those places around there. We've got a really good friend that we stay with every time. His name's Frank, and he runs a B&B, like an Airbnb. The last time we were there, we sat out in his back garden, had a bunch of good Belgian beers. We had a great fire going. We had music on. We talked about politics, religion, So you can make friends everywhere in the world. That's part of traveling as well, isn't it?
Lovely.
You make friends and you have really good, community. You're building community, which again, going back to the religion thing, that's something that's vitally important when you get out. You've
Yes.
got to have a new tribe. You've got to have a community wherever it may be.
Okay. So the last little bit of sorry, excuse me, there's that gassy drink again. So anybody who's listening to this, or even somebody who's talking with you on this podcast, what advice would you give to somebody who says, I've got a story to tell, or I've got a story that I think might be interesting? What advice would you give them about embarking on that kind of project?
Yeah, tell your story. I mean, you might get a hold of you or me. Find me on Facebook or X, the dreaded X, whatever you want to call it, before Musk just destroys it, and tell your story. You could be on my show, you could be on your show, you could be on other shows. Or I've talked to people. I just had a call the other day from someone who got a hold of me and said, I listened to one of your episodes from about 4 or 5 years ago called Is Evangelicalism a Cult? And there was something that absolutely changed my life. She said, I need to talk to you about it. Do you mind if we have a Facebook call? So we talked for about 45 minutes just the other night, and I'm like, yeah, let's give me a call. Let's talk. And we had a really good conversation, so it's funny to know that you did something 5, 6 years ago on a podcast and someone's stumbled across it and it's changed your life.
Yeah, that's quite
amazing.
something. Yeah, I've had 1 or 2 bits of feedback along similar. People have pointed out particular episodes and said that they really enjoyed that episode or that change up. And talking of episodes, I'd like to do a quick plug for one of my episodes because I didn't call it, but I've gone and checked, and my most popular episode from this year, 2024, is an interview I did with a current pastor who wrote a book called Holy Hell: the Case Against Eternal Damnation. And so this guy believes that everybody will be united with God. He's a universalist, and he thinks that that eternal torment is not biblical, is not what is intended by any of the Bible authors, and is a completely unbiblical interpretation. And that is, by a long way, by an unassailable margin, my most listened to episode this year for 2024. So that is a topic that is clearly a topic that needs talking about.
Absolutely. I remember when Rob Bell came out with his book, Love Wins. Did you ever read that?
No, but I am
8 or
vaguely
10 years
familiar
ago?
with some of the controversy that came out there. People, how dare he say that God's a loving God?
It was the interesting. I actually wrote an article about. I read some of the book reviews, and I wrote an article about the book reviews of his book. And the same kind of thing. People were just excoriating him, calling him a heretic and worse and everything else. Hell is a foundational principle of Christianity.
Yeah.
They're going out and defending this doctrine of hell.
And that plugs into exactly what we were saying half an hour ago about the whole thing about poor mental health is just baked into the entirety of Christianity. And if people are going to fight to keep eternal damnation for their loving God, it just shows you that it's there. That is what is baked into Christianity.
It's crazy. I mean, if people are following the news now, I mean, in the American political scene, Donald Trump's obviously just won the election. But what's interesting now is that his cabinet selections, some of them are just insane. But the amazing thing is Republicans are going out and defending those choices. And it's exactly that same dynamic, that it's that cult-like that you go, you're defending the indefensible, but it just shows how brainwashed you actually are in deep in this thing. And it's that same exact dynamic.
I think that's really quite shocking. But one thing that, on that very note, one thing that has occurred to me, and it'll be interesting to hear what your more informed opinion is, but I do wonder if some of those Republicans that are supporting these choices are doing so out of preservation rather than sycophancy. Because if they critique Trump now, they're going to have a tough ride from the people that vote for them or against them.
Yeah, absolutely. But it just, again, shows the total control that Trump has over the Republican Party. My argument is it is a political cult of personality, just like Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, any number of dictators. That's what he wants to be. And like you say, whether it doesn't matter if it's sycophancy or out of a desire to preserve yourself. The bottom line is he is in total control of the Republican Party, so they have to do whatever they feel like they have to do to. And you see the ones who buck the system. This is going back to Lifton's categories of cult markers. is the last one is the dispensing of existence. If you no longer toe the line, if you question the leaders' doctrines or dogmas or whatever, you will be dispensed with. This is what happened to Liz Cheney and some Adam Kinzinger and some others who stood up against Trump. They're gone. And that's how the cult works.
Yeah. Thank you for ending on a positive note there, Clint.
Hey.
But I think we need to be aware of it. I'm being serious. We do need to be aware of that, and we need to look out for those signs. And rather than do it to depress ourselves, we need to take positive action to look after ourselves in this time. I imagine that you're probably in regular contact with your friends over in America, and you're keeping up to date on what's going on. It is depressing what's going on in the politics, and I wish all our American listeners good health and happiness.
Yeah,
and I don't really know what I can do from this end to ease the next 4 years.
I don't know, but I think, going back to our earlier point about what can you do to recover from religion, I think one of the biggest things, one of the most beneficial things has been education.
Yeah.
And we kind of touched around that. One of the things when I read, like I said, Robert J. Lifton's Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, books on cult psychology, cult tactics, that's really when the penny dropped for me. I realized that my upbringing had been, in fact, cultic, and that when I started looking at the markers of cult, I could name every single one and point to Christianity and say, that was done to me. And then that's when it was like, okay, not only did that happen to me, this is what the psychological effect of it was on my, trauma and my psyche and my sort of nature and who I am. That's where the recovery can sort of help, I think, when you can name those things and say, yeah, that's what happened to me. How do I get recovery? How do I help, get help on the back end? So it's a huge thing, isn't it?
It is. It is. Thank you very much for that, Clint. We will talk again. I always love having a chat with you. This has been a wonderful. We arranged this at very short notice, and it's reminded me why I need to make it an annual thing at bare minimum to talk to you. So let's try and sort that out. 2025 is literally only a short step away. In fact, by the time listeners are listening to this, it will be 2025. So I hope you all had a lovely Christmas and a spiffing new year. And until 2025, read well, write well, and enjoy life. And until next time, be reasonable.